Hi, guys. While we're waiting for everybody to join, would you mind just going through introducing yourself, saying a little about your organization, what you do, who you are, where you come from, where did you go? Start with you, Ben, because I'm going in order of my egotistical eye line.
Sure. I'm Ben Sachs. I've had kind of a winding career. I started as a lawyer, went to law school, and worked at a law firm. But wound my way through the business side. I was a business consultant at BCG for a couple of years, and then went to a tech company. Since we sold that company, I do consulting for businesses and law firms. And that led me to think a lot about management. And I wrote a book about management for lawyers and thinking about how do we build stronger teams? How do we turn lawyers into better leaders? And I teach a lot of that at UVA Law School and related topics as well. So it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Sarah, you're up.
Cool. Thanks for having me. I work as a business coach at Lawyerist, and I had an interesting background where my career came kind of full circle. But years ago, 12 years ago, built and sold a legal alternative service back in California. So we weren't a law firm. We offered alternative legal services. And then after we sold that company, I started coaching in my own private practice. And when I realized I loved coaching so much, but I didn't really want to do the other aspects of running my own coaching practice, I just wanted to coach all day. I found Lawyerist, and they liked that I'm not a lawyer. They liked that I brought some experience in the alternative legal space with just the direction that the legal industry is going, and things like productizing legal services and my experience with building online courses and content and those sort of online, like digital marketing things. That came in handy. All that experience came in handy with the firm owners that we coach at Lawyerist, and it's a very holistic approach to helping firm owners, and it's a lot of fun. It's really rewarding.
Awesome. Last, but certainly not least.
Well, I'm Doug. I'm Doug Brown. I am a lawyer turned a business executive turned professor, speaker, and now an executive coach. And I work with the leaders of law firms to help them achieve, peak productivity without burning themselves or their people out, so that they can live the lives that they want and ultimately find a way when they're ready to not be in practice anymore to transfer their business to whatever the right solution is for them. I practiced law with a firm for many years, and then I got recruited to go in house at a corporation because I thought general counsel was what I wanted to do, and I kept finding myself drawn onto the business side. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs, so I kept trying to fix legal problems with business things, and so that kind of led me into a variety of operations roles where I managed HR for a while and IT and did startups and turnarounds for this big business. And in 2008, I transitioned out of that. I was tired of being in a big company, and the bottom fell out from under the market, so I had to reinvent myself again. And I found myself teaching entrepreneurship, leadership, and innovation in an MBA program. And that led me to become, years later, the executive director of the Connecticut State Bar Association, what I affectionately refer to as my bar rescue, turning them around and getting them on the right track again. And then I figured that having 10,000 lawyers as bosses wasn't stressful enough, so I wound up helping my friend in his fourth generation retail jewelry business convert it to the fifth generation. And then I joined Walt Hampton and Summit Success as his chief learning officer and head executive coach in 2019, where I now do that full time. And I'm coming to you today from my summer office in Cape Cod, a little office share here. And I'm anchored in Bluffton, South Carolina. So I do my work with folks by video.
So I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to put my moderator hat on for just 1 minute here. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Answering Legal's 2023 Law Firm Reboot Camp. If you're not sick of me yet or sick of hearing my name is Nick Werker. I'm the marketing director here at Answering Legal. For those who don't already know, this camp will be providing law firm leaders with expert advice on how to reinvent their practice for the second half of 2023 and hopefully beyond. Hopefully this isn't only good for like 3 months and then everything changes with AI. So today's portion of camp will be focused on law office management related topics, and our first panel of the day will feature a wide-ranging discussion on how to better run your practice. I'm going to start this off with a general question for everyone. What is a well-intentioned mistake that you see lawyers make all the time when it comes to running their firms that is like this easy, low-hanging fruit you'd like to encourage our viewers to stop committing?
I was thinking about this question from the perspective of spanning kind of law and business. When I was at a tech company, I oversaw software engineers and marketers and the analytics team and all these other folks and the legal work, but that was a smaller part of my job at that point. And in that executive role, one of the things I really realized is how different we need to approach non-legal work and legal work. And lawyers think of everything as legal work. So when they're running their business internally, all the internal processes, they want it to be perfect, just like their client work has to be perfect. So client work, I get why we want to deliver a perfect brief and we wait and we make it perfect and we don't do anything until it's ready to go and then we launch it. But internal stuff, when you're trying to turn around your culture or think about your business, bring in new software, bring in new tools, whatever it is, we have to be experimental. We have to be willing to make some mistakes and fail and iterate and try things again. And law firms I work with, especially big firms, work with international firms, they're so afraid to make a mistake, even internally, even though the stakes internally are actually not that high. So I would say, think about that internal work and internal business improvement and development we do differently than our client work.
Love that. I love that you use the word experiment. It's something that we talk about a lot at Lawyerist. Everything that we do is really an experiment in growing and developing and working on our business. And you have to be willing to fail as many times as it takes to get it right, in my opinion. And that's, you have the luxury of being able to do that in a business, maybe not necessarily on the legal side, but you do. And it's a whole new way of thinking. Just to add to that, I think that one of the well-intentioned mistakes that I see very often, way too often, is firm owners who are on the side of the legal work and are dealing with clients directly and always wanting to be available to everyone in order to deliver an amazing service. And what they don't realize is that they are serving no one by trying to serve everyone. And when they can wrap their brain around the idea of having boundaries and being ruthless with their time and the attention and where they are giving of themselves and how in which they're answering questions, whether they're taking phone calls on their cell phone all day or they're living in their email just trying to respond as quick as possible. It's actually taking them away from being able to do what they do best. And as soon as they stop doing that, the ironic part is people start respecting them more. And we train our people, we train our team, we train our clients on how to communicate with us and how to get their questions answered. And they're looking to us to be the leader there, the guide, the counselor of this is how we're going to do it. You need to schedule a time. This is how we answer your questions, schedule a time to get a phone call rather than just doing it, on the fly, because I want to be able to focus on you when I'm with you.
I love that, Sarah. And the making mistakes piece, it kind of dovetails into the thing that I see lawyers making is they're leading and operating their firm out of habit rather than with mindful intention. So they're focusing solely on billable hours and operating efficiency, but they're kind of missing the holistic kind of the well-being of their team, which creates kind of a high-stress work environment and even high turnover. And what I encourage is, and sometimes when I first started teaching this stuff, the lawyers like, oh, mindfulness is so squishy, feely, and intentional. It's like, no, mindful just means being aware of how you're showing up in the world. And intentional, you're a control freak anyway, so why not be intentional about what you pay attention to? And it's not just the metrics, but it's how the team, operates. And so if you can be mindfully intentional about what you measure, how you measure it, how you give support, how you interact with your team, then we can get past this thing I hear all the time of, those insert generation here don't want to work, don't understand me, why don't they work more hours, and start building a team that can be much more effective together, because in 2023 and beyond, reaching peak performance really needs an entirely new approach than even what we experienced, in our growing up in our professions.
When I was growing up, I had a lot of lawyers in my family. I wanted to go to law school, so I think life had a funny way of like pushing me towards where I ended up in like the legal, I'll call it the industry. I'm not really in the profession, I can't say, but I definitely work with a lot of lawyers. And I've told this story before, I'm sure. I'm sorry, Doug, that you have to listen to me again. But my grandmother's been working with this one lawyer her basically whole life. And she runs his law practice. She started out as a paralegal. And I remember being younger and like high school age, getting ready to go to college, and I would ask her all these questions like, what does Paul do about trial? And what does he do? He runs a personal injury practice. He owns a personal injury practice in Brooklyn. And she would be like, Paul doesn't go to trial. Paul has a trial lawyer. I'm like, what? And then I would learn more about like being a lawyer. And Paul doesn't take phone calls. Paul like oversees that. I'm like, so what does he actually do? And I never understood what it was like to run a successful business without trying to like, and this guy is highly successful. He's very happy. He has a fulfilling relationship. He does work a lot, but he does the things that like we talk about. And I think that we get wrapped up in this preconceived notion of lawyers have to work 140 hours a week. They have to do this. They have to answer the phone every time it rings. They want high touch on every single case, and that's just not sustainable or effective. So my next question to all of you is, because I think what we're so concerned about is productivity, because we want this work-life balance, but we want to be as productive as possible while we're at work so that we feel like we can actually take a break, which I'm sure we'll cover in a little bit. But what is your top or your few top tips for law firm leaders when it comes to increasing productivity?
Actually just taught a study group on making a plan for productivity. And I came up with sort of a, if you want to be productive and you want to make a plan to be productive, because you can't just be productive by accident. Otherwise you can't really define it as productivity. It's just being busy. And we know that being busy does not equate with being successful. So a few of the things that I came up with in the Plan for Productivity group was, number one, it starts with mindset. If you think that there's not enough time to do all the things that need to be done and get your priorities accomplished, then that will prove to be true. There just won't ever be enough time. It's sort of like the Parkinson's theory. I think that's what they call it, where it's the amount of time you give something to do it, that's the amount of time it's going to take, right?
Yeah.
So it starts with mindset and being open to the idea that I can do what I need to do and I can prioritize. And so one of the other factors of making a plan for productivity is the ability to prioritize, the ability to reprioritize constantly. And you kind of have to get into a cadence with that, where whether maybe it's the first half hour of your week and the last half hour of your week, that's your planning bookend, and then that's your sort of decompressing, downloading, figuring out what worked and what didn't work that week. But in between, every day you're constantly reprioritizing and going, you know what? With this new thing that just came up, this is no longer a priority. We're going to push that off. With this new thing that came up, this is like, what's the MVP here, the minimum viable productivity, I guess you could use that for what needs to actually happen here. And sometimes things open up and things get off your plate that allows you to focus more on the high impact things. And so the ability to deprioritize as well. So reprioritize, and deprioritize constantly. And I have a few other factors that I think plays into how to be productive and make a plan for productivity, but I'll leave it at that and share the floor.
the thing that I see when I go in and work with leaders at law firms, and I ask them, um, how are you measuring productivity? Like, how do you know, what does success look like? And it turns out that they haven't given a lot of thought to what they're measuring or how they're measuring things. So they're not paying attention to hours worked versus billable. It's just billable. Well, if you're having to work 100 hours to bill 40, then you have a different problem. And they're also not measuring the quality of the work, the efficiency of the process, or engagement, client satisfaction. It's all about the input of hours and dollars. And the way to start fixing that is to really start looking at your processes and your workflows to make sure you've got the right people doing the right things and you're not doing rework. And then look at how you're kind of delegating your tasks, because when you give your team a clear definition of what success looks like, holistic success, not just bill all these hours at the expense of quality and of your life, and how are we measuring how what we're doing is impacting the lives of the people we're meant to serve. I work with a company does malpractice insurance defense, and the hospitals hire them, but they're really taking care of the doctors and the nurses who are supposed to take care of us. So when you can connect what you're measuring with the ultimate people they're serving, then you're putting this kind of power of purpose behind your productivity, and that allows you to do what Sara said, which is to prioritize based on what's most important, not always what's on fire.
I love both of these answers. I also want to talk to both of you the rest of the time because it's so much fun. When I think about Sarah's comment too about how long stuff takes, there's an old adage in software engineering called Hofstadter's law, and Hofstadter's law says an engineering task will always take longer than you think, even when accounting for Hofstadter's law, and it creates like this infinite loop, which engineers love. And it's so true. It's so easy to just spiral on this. And what I like about both your answers is you're talking both from the individual perspective and also from the team perspective. And that's so important to think about in productivity. How can I individually think of my priorities? And how can I translate that into direction for the team by setting those goals? Doug, I was working with a client on return to office, post-COVID kind of return to office planning. They were trying to get people back in the office. And I said, what are you measuring for success? And they said, whether people come back to the office. Well, wait a minute. Why are we going back to the office? Well, collaboration and this and that. Well, where's that in your metrics? Are we measuring collaboration and engagement and employee retention, or are we measuring butts and seats? So these are wonderful directions to take to try to figure out and streamline your priorities. Because if you don't know what good looks like, if you haven't established that and communicated that really clearly, how the hell is your team going to get on the same page to tackle this? And what happens then without that clarity is people kind of spiral a little bit. So I guess my example would be very similar, but I'll take it maybe to a direct to a team level. You've got a team you're managing, and you think as a leader, you know what everyone's job is, and they know what their job is, and they know how the pieces fit together. It is incredible how often it comes back, the work product comes back a little bit off from what you expect, or they just don't quite hit the timeline you expect, or they just didn't take into account all this context. And a little thing that helps is just constantly writing it down. I mean, I've been consulting for a while. I do a business strategy consulting now too. And I'll sit down with a group and I will put up in every team meeting, I'll just put up a Word doc or a Notion doc, or whatever you're using. And I'll be taking notes live in the meeting as I'm facilitating it with action items. And the act of writing on action items on a screen for everyone to see in a meeting triggers people to say, oh no, I don't know what that means. Don't put my name next to that. Like, I don't know what that means yet. And then you go, okay, well, let's talk about that. And we clarify. And it's because if we don't write it down and we don't force people to reconcile exactly what their takeaways are, exactly what the next steps are, what the timelines are, and so on, they always think they're leaving the meeting with that clarity, and they're not. And I'm watching really well-paid, really successful folks who still leave the meeting with different understandings of what's supposed to happen because of that lack of clarity. So, bringing that clarity to everything we do, that intentionality you all talked about, I just think that's so important to making the team productive, efficient, and to your point, Sara, staying on track with those priorities.
And then when I've done that, when we map processes, you get a lawyer that says, well, I know what the process is. Okay, tell me the steps. All right, tell me more steps. And if I can talk to two lawyers, they'll both describe different processes. And then if I talk to the legal assistants, the paralegals, they've got a different process. When you put those up on a whiteboard or in a document, now you're getting somewhere.
Exactly. And now you see how two different partners actually feel differently about this. Now there's conflict. That's good conflict. I love that approach. Got to get that conflict to the surface and talk about it and solve it so you can get the right goals. Otherwise, we're all moving in a different direction.
Or they could just be frustrated and resentful about it forever.
Yeah.
You both had mentioned processes and clarity, which is, I think, a prerequisite to being productive at all. And then also another, I mean, just realistically speaking, how do we set priorities? I'll just talk internally at Lawyerist because I'm so proud that we're a company, we practice what we preach. And then I used this word get into a cadence earlier. And what I mean by that is like you have a system for how you go about prioritizing and how you go about scoping out those projects that you identify would be high impact. And basically the way we do it is we know our strategic objectives. So we know exactly where we want to be in 3 years from now. And we know exactly what's going to happen each year to get there in 3 years. And then we just keep working backwards to go, well, now we know what has to happen this year. So we're always clear on our end of year goals. And then we follow kind of a traction model of, it's like our version of traction model of quarterly rocks, as they call that, or priorities, projects, whatever you want to call them. And the idea is if you're trying to fill a jar with rocks, you always want to put the big ones in first so that the little ones will fit around them. It just won't work the other way around. And so we absolutely prioritize having time blocked on our calendar each week to spend time working on our quarterly rocks. Those things are going to get us closer to those 1-year goals and then those 3-year goals. And I think the most important part of it for me is understanding what done looks like. Okay, I know I need to do this thing. What does done look like? And there's that clarity piece. And that's where some people have different ideas of what we're doing here. And then also scoping it out, like actually just getting out a piece of paper or a task management tool like Monday or Trello or one of those, or just a spreadsheet. I like to do it in just a spreadsheet, and I like to start with, this is the thing, this is what we call it done, and then I just work backwards from there and go, what are all the things that need to happen? Give myself a timeline for those action steps, and then schedule it in. I always say if it's not on the calendar with time blocked for it, it won't get done. So it's kind of simple stuff at the end of the day to be productive.
I'm going to back up for 1 second so we can answer a question. Matthew asks, or says, Doug makes a great point about too much focus on hourly billing. What is this panel's opinion on alternative fee arrangements and how that would help law firms better manage their firms?
I love them.
I love them
No,
too.
I mean, look, I honestly, and I teach at UVA Law School. I have to prepare my students for the billable hour, and it is horrible for so many reasons. I will give this counter argument though, because I think, look, so I'll give my why I think that, and then quickly, because maybe that's too easy. But look, I think that because of what Doug said, when we're trying to focus on outcomes and goals, when billable hours are your goal, it messes up efficiency. I'm guessing that people listening understand like why that can be a problem. But I'll give you an example. When I was at Sidley, I built a script that allowed me to do document review faster. It literally just like my keystrokes would move faster through documents when I was reviewing thousands of documents. And I told my senior associate, I'm so proud. No, look at me. Built some script. I'm a lawyer, but I code. Look at me. I'm so cool. And he goes, Ben, that's cool, but we bill by the hour, right? And I just lost all willingness to live any further. And that, I think that just speaks to something really, really negative. Now, I will say, I talked to a partner at another firm about this, is why don't you use these more? So they're using them more, but some clients actually don't like it. And one of the reasons I'm hearing clients not like it is they don't know how much something is really going to cost. They don't know if $50,000 is the right number to spend on a motion to dismiss or whatever it is. In different prices, obviously different things. But they don't know if that's the right number, but they know what hours might be right. Now that seems strange to me. It seems kind of counterintuitive. But when you say upfront, here's the cost, they might say, gosh, is that really appropriate? Let's see what the hours are like. So some of our clients aren't really used to that model yet, and they have some skepticisms. But curious from others on this, what you all think about it.
My approach is that your firm should be focused on the specific needs of the problems you solve and your specific client avatar. And that should drive how you're doing billing. I view the billable hour as a cop-out, because if you really know your clients and if you really know your matters, you're in the best position to provide a reasonable estimate or bucket of what it ought to typically take. And so you ought to be able to go to your client and say, based on these assumptions, this is what it's going to cost. And if it turns out that some of these assumptions are wrong because either bad information or the circumstances change, we might have to come back to you and look at it differently. And I think the process problem where lawyers don't actually know how much it's going to cost because they haven't even looked at it that way, and the fear of making a mistake kind of keeps them from even having the conversation. And to get back to your point, Ben, you've got to be willing to experiment with this because your clients value authenticity and they value your alignment with their business goals and not perfection.
We
So
lost
this
Doug for 1 second.
requires taking a risk.
The way we approach billing and fee arrangements and fee structure and all this is, at the end of the day, we care about two things. We want the clients to have an amazing client experience. We really want to blow them out of the park with the process of working with us and make them feel safe and secure during that process. We also want to build a profitable law firm. So how do we figure out how to do that in a way that is both absolutely experimentation, but I think arguably, like, for those people out there that are still not convinced that anything other than hourly billing is, even worth exploring at this point, I think it's probably safe to say that us on this call and this panel could go on and on and on about, the pros and cons. But for me, I'll just speak from a personal perspective. I recently hired a lawyer to help me through my divorce, and she charges hourly. And the thought that I have before I ever have a question for my lawyer is, how much is this question going to cost me? And if we can build something like this, is why I love subscription models. For example, we just did an in-person firm retreat with these partners who wanted to just basically relaunch their whole business model, and they wanted to turn what they offer into a subscription pricing plan so that it was easy to think about and explain, and their client could say, oh, let me call my attorney. Let me consult with my attorney. And so it obviously there are guidelines to which they can still be available to their clients on demand. But when people feel like they are supported and they don't have to think about the money part of it more than once in the beginning, then they're actually going to use you and rely on you and lean on you like they're supposed to, because you're the counselor, you're the person that's supposed to be taking charge here. So that's what's most important to me is it client-centered, and is it going to be profitable for us? And we're going to have to iterate as we go and change things as we go to make it fit both.
I could not agree with that more. I want to underscore that, Sarah. The point you make about people picking up the phone, that hesitation, that it would kill my business. I'm in consulting now. That would kill my business, because the whole point is I want to create a relationship with a client where I can then get into more places with that client, right? So I want to be a go-to partner, thought partner for lots of different things. For me to do that, I can't have them calling up my point of contact within the firm and saying, can I ask Ben about this? Is it in his scope? What will it charge me? Who is going to pay for that? I mean, that friction, forget about it. We're done. I mean, I've structured my contracts around that and say, look, you have access to me for roughly this many hours. And they say, do you track the hours? I say, no, I don't actually track the hours. This is the percentage of time I'm giving you. And if at any given month you feel like you're not getting the value, we're going to have a conversation about that. And then it's my job to blow them out of the way with the value I deliver with that time. That takes some trust. And that what on my model might take a little bit of building up to something like that. But it's been amazing to be able to have a relationship with clients where I can say, for this much money I'm charging you, these are the projects I'm working on with you. Do we agree that you're getting your value? And I should be delivering that. If I am, then it's this free-flowing relationship where it's expanding. And the relationships I've had like that have only expanded in value and monthly fees over time. The relationships that are more constrained tend to stay constrained over time. So it's really interesting to see that play out.
So how would you two go about setting an alternative fee structure for something that you've never done anything except charge hourly for? What would be the first steps?
Doug, you want to go first?
Yeah, this is, I had a lot of experience with this in some of my roles, and it's really getting clear about what do you expect to happen? Like based on your prior experience, um, what time do you expect it would take, and what are the assumptions behind that? Like I do a lot of work with family lawyers or estate planning lawyers, and in family law, it's very variable, right? Because the other side is particularly litigious, then you're going to spend a lot more. But if you have enough facts to say, look, there's no children involved in this matter. This is the level of assets. We know a little bit about the other lawyer, and we think so. If everything pans out as we expect, it should cost you, what we're going to charge you X. Now, if something changes, then we're going to have to talk, just like Ben had suggested, because it's kind of outside of what the assumptions are, and you have to make there's no way for lawyers to not translate that initially to billable hours. So you have to know about how long it would take. And you have to know your processes and your priorities, like you guys have talked about, so that you can be efficient at doing that and make some money at doing it. And you have to know how to have an effective sales conversation. Yes, a sales conversation to articulate the value, because someone would say, use another analogy of criminal defense lawyers. Say it's going to cost you X amount to get to this point. Well, that's really expensive. Okay, it might be. What's your freedom worth? So you have to have the confidence in what you're doing, of how long it's going to take, and be able to articulate those assumptions. Because without that, it's just the lawyer taking all the risk. And I think that's why people don't do it is, well, I didn't get all the information from my client and something might happen. So the safest thing is to do it by the hour.
Those are all really good considerations. I mean, I think you're nailing it in the sense of the research up front is really important. So first of all, you know your business. You also need to know the market, know what's out there, and thinking about what those roadblocks might be. And then I would underscore the point you made about communication. When you communicate to the client, not only in the sales pitch, but throughout the matter, really trying to be clear about what's happening, what's changing, and why. Especially if you're dealing with lay people, lay clients, as opposed to working with big commercial clients who might have in-house counsel and they sort of know how all this stuff works. You need to be really communicative so they understand why, hey, something's coming up. It may be early, but this may affect our fee schedule. And here's why. That trust, we need to be overboard with that. So I sort of imagine like a 3x kind of number. It would have 3 times the communication I think someone will need is what they probably need. And I need to produce probably 3 times the value they think for that price. So when they see a price, they need to not get just break even in their minds. They need to feel like I really got good value because, Ben, whoever is so great. And that's not easy to do. But if we have that mindset of like, I have to deliver at that level, it pushes you to communicate more to build a better relationship. So, I think that's really important. I also say breaking down into phases is good. So if it's a really big matter, we break it down into phases and we start thinking, okay, well, for this phase, we think it's this. For the next phase, we're going to come back and have a conversation before we commit to that pricing, but it can be this range, and here's some ways it's done it, or here's some reasons why it's gone A, B, and C. And I would reference previous matters if you can to give really clear examples, so it doesn't sound like you're just pulling it out of your bottom, right? We're trying to give some concreteness. I've done this before, and here's how it could flow. So that transparency and that pre-work, breaking into phases, people can get a little more comfortable and building trust a little over time. I have found that for like consulting work, it really depends. I mean, sometimes I'll do it like, here's a couple of projects. It'll take me 2 or 3 months. Let's have some check-ins, and it's kind of a one fee split across a couple of months. Sometimes it's 1 fee per project. Sometimes it's just a straight monthly retainer with like an unlimited model, but it's not truly unlimited. It's just saying, look, we're not going to artificially cap the scope of the work. If it gets too much for me and I feel like it's really too much, I'll have a conversation with you and we'll have to trust each other that we can manage that conversation effectively. I only do that after a project or two, but if I've done a project or two, they know me, they know they can trust me. I say, let's do a retainer. And from here on, I'll check in with you if I feel like we're piling on too much, and I'll explain why, and we'll come to a resolution. And the nice thing about that, I tell them, is I'm already doing the work. By the time you come back to me and say, oh, and I say I'm worried about fees or whatever, I've already committed to doing it. I'm not going to leave you out hanging to dry here, but I'm going to have a conversation about future work. So they can keep using me. I say, use and abuse me, right? Use me as much as you want. If you're getting a lot of value and I come back to you and say, we need to change the pricing, we can talk about it then, but you've already gotten the use. I'm not going to go back and bill you for work I've already done. So to really try to encourage them to use me as much as possible, and we'll figure out, the implications of that at the next phase. We'll be able to continue to evolve as we need to.
And there's one more piece that you made me think of, Ben, and that is to be specific with the client about what they have to do for the model to work. So it means if I'm asking you, I'm going to ask you for documents and information. I'm going to ask you to respond. It means you're going to respond promptly and you're going to give me the complete information, because we know that oftentimes it's our own client's behavior or lack thereof that drives fees up.
The question came with this this part about how does it help you run a better law firm? And so I just want to kind of drive that point home, that when you come up with a billing structure that works for the clients and works for the firm, how the firm functions and operates can look so different than a traditional law firm model. For example, one of our labsters, as we call them, our coaching programs called Labs. So one of our labsters in San Diego, family law practice, and the way that she's structured it is she's flat fee, and all of her staff members are treated as equally as important and as valuable in the process of helping people through these family law matters, which means that she can, she doesn't have to worry about this attorney and what they're billing. It's a flat fee, so everyone gets involved, which means that she's actually able to take 3 days off a week to go volunteer. And she actually has her staff take a full day off to go volunteer too. But everybody's getting paid the same amount because they're able to structure the actual work getting done in such a different way. Because we've got this person focused on really this part of it, and then this person takes over from here. But everyone's kind of interchangeable also, because they're all supporting each other. Everybody's getting paid. It's flat fee. So it just, if anyone wants to speak on like how that would work better in a law firm as well and how it sort of benefits the law firm, I'm so fascinated with this part and really passionate about, just like you guys, helping firm owners build law firms that not just serve their clients, but serve their lives too and allow them to do the things that are important to them.
I like the concern that was raised. I think you said it, Sarah, that how much is this phone call going to cost me when I'm trying to deal with a matter with my lawyer? And I always try to relate law firms to a service business that I would really enjoy using. And I think about my own business a lot because it's very volume based. We have a lot of law firms, and I cannot imagine what would happen if I started charging each of my customers for their need to contact my support team, for their need to change their services with me, or what might the ramifications be of if they were cautious to contact me about making those necessary changes. When I would go to use a lawyer, I would prefer there to be value-based billing or outcome-based billing. So I got a traffic ticket recently, very bad ticket. I don't really want to talk about it. And I called up.
Now I really want to talk about it, Nick.
Yeah, right.
I was going so fast. New car, I was having fun. I thought it was very late at night too. I didn't think anybody was around. I got busted. The cop was not happy with me. I'm a nice guy too. I was like, yeah, I'm really sorry. It was crazy. So I called my lawyer. I've been doing business with this guy forever. I know him. I see him on the golf course, and I'm like, this is my first traffic ticket ever. So I know how the process works. I'm like, okay, what do you need me to do? Take a picture of the ticket. I'll email it to you. You send me back the retainer. I sign it, so on and so forth. He had this weird model where he was like, okay, here's what I'm going to do, because Suffolk County, if you live in Suffolk County, I'm sorry, you're never getting away with no points. I have points on my license right now. He's like, if I can get this knocked down to a certain thing, I won't charge you any extra, but normally, I have an outcome where it's X if I can get you 0 points. It's X if I can get you here. And this is the actual flat fee that you're going to pay me unless I have to go back to court. If I have to go back to court, it's going to cost you X. I knew what it was going to cost me to get this problem taken care of, and at no point was I worried that this was going to cost me so much money and I don't know what he's doing, and I knew what the outcome was going to be, and he even prepped me for the fact he was like, I'm not going to get you 0 points because you're an idiot and you went way too fast. But I did like the ability to to pay more to get like a better outcome. I don't know. Does anybody have an opinion on that? Is there, because I haven't sat around and thought about the ramifications of based billing for like every type of law firm, but I do feel like it definitely could work in criminal defense cases and some other types of areas of law.
I want to encourage experimentation. I also want to encourage people to be mindful that some states or judges or malpractice carriers may not look favorably on some alternative fee arrangements. So it's not to not do it, but just to do the diligence and um, research what's available. Maybe talk to I used to work, when I was at the Bar Association with the Chief State Disciplinary Council in Connecticut, and we even did a podcast and stuff with them, and they loved it when lawyers asked questions in advance before they did stupid things, so that they can be a resource, and your malpractice carrier can be a resource, because your need to be creative could create a problem for you. So I just couldn't help but put my lawyer hat on like that.
I teach PR, although it doesn't come up in my professional responsibility class often about alternative fees. I do know that in general, there are certain things you're allowed to base fees on, certain things you're not. Most of the things we're talking about probably are within the general ABA rules, but I think it's a great point, Doug, to check the state, and they all have hotlines. Use them. It's great. It's a great point. I mean, Nick, I think that the use of alternative fee arrangements where you can talk about outcomes, I think it's less about client outcome, which is where I think you get a little hairy, not even so much in fees under the ethics rules, but you can't promise an outcome in general. But I think what you were getting at wasn't promising an outcome. It was saying if these things happen, and then it will involve more or less work, then the fee will change as follows. And that, if it's that way, I think it would probably abide under most ethics rules or work under most ethics rules, and I think that could be reasonable. So it basically, you're forecasting in advance. Here are the forks in the road for us. These forks carry consequences in terms of the work involved. That will change the fee. I think people appreciate that.
I think it's really important for all business owners, regardless of the industry that they're in, to remember that when they are selling something, they are not selling, in our case, they're not selling legal services. They're not selling attorney themselves as an attorney. They're selling a solution. And if we can stay focused on, since we're talking about value billing, we need to convince our clients that as the expert here, we're never going to let them do anything that doesn't make sense financially. And I will say that is one thing that I appreciate so much about my divorce attorney is that she's like, look, all these, because, I'm like, well, what if I do this? And what if I do this? And she's like, all these things you could do, yes, but this is what it's going to cost you. Is it worth that for you? And she was like, I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction where you're going to end up in a worse place financially than when you started working with me. And so if we can stay focused on what's the solution here that we're all trying to get after and what's the best way to get here, then I think that it conveys and it helps us stay focused on what's the value here. I want to do what's best for the client and at the end of the day.
Yeah, anytime you have any conversation with a client, you can say, I think we shouldn't go down that road. It'll be too expensive and you're not getting a lot of value out of that. Anytime you say that, it's a huge trust builder, right? Because they know you're theoretically going against your short-term incentives. And it's in your long-term incentives to build that trust. So it's a good move, but that's a great way to build trust with those kinds of comments, Sarah.
And on the other hand, some people, like one of the family law attorneys that I coach, she realized she doesn't sell divorce services. She sells happiness. At the end of the day, that's the solution. These people want to be happy. And for some clients, they're willing to pay whatever it costs to get there, right? And so it also probably depends on, and this is where we can, there's also, I guess, depending on ethics rules, some room to customize certain pricing and legal services depending on what's the outcome that you want. Like, let's set some goals. # what is done to bring it back full circle.
I want to ask you guys this because we brought this up before. I'll speak from my own experience. I have hired somebody who works, I'm in Long Island or on Long Island, whatever you want to call it, and I have a guy who works in my department. He lives in Miami. He's actually in the chat right now. You can talk to him. It's Tony. So
Tony.
For me, it wasn't so important to have somebody like a butt in a seat. But in your opinion, and I don't I'm sure that there are problems with having remote work, especially in like different states as far as jurisdiction. But in your opinion, do law firms need everyone present at the office in order to reach peak performance, or is there some sort of in between blend model of work from home or like work from home locally? What's your guys' take on this?
I mean, I can go first. I did a bit on PLI about this last year, and the like I'm of two minds here. On the one hand, I believe firmly that any organization can be effective remotely, except for jobs that literally need physical. You can't be a surgeon remotely unless you're a robot surgeon. There's certain things that aside, okay, if you are doing the kind of work that is collaborative and it can be in a meeting room or a home, there's no reason theoretically that you can't be just as productive. There are plenty of examples of tech companies and non-tech companies that do this. I worked at one, and I've done both. So yes, I think theoretically, absolutely, and there are tools you can do. The problem that I think at least a lot of my law firm clients have with this, and the reason that I actually don't counsel all of them to try to do it as a fully remote organization, is because some of them are so bad at management that if they had to do the things you would need to do to be good at management remotely, it would require like rewriting so much of their internal code, so to speak, their DNA, that I don't think it's feasible. I mean, if you try to get Sidley Austin to go fully remote, like a huge law firm, thousands of attorneys, they're not set up to have that. They frankly the ability to turn around and ask somebody a question is important because they're so bad at documenting what the hell anyone's doing today. There's so a lot of infrastructure is required. Companies who do this well, they have that intentionality, off the chart, right? They document everything. Things are available in a central location. You can see the project charts. You know who's doing what. You know the goals. You can track documents. Everything is very tech forward. Everything is well organized. And managers have a pulse in the team because they're very effectively trained on how to communicate effectively, to ask questions, make sure they're clearing roadblocks, things that some managers think they're always doing intuitively. But if you actually look at the reviews and talk to people, you're like, these are breaking down. Those breakdowns get worse remotely if you already have a bad system. The quote I heard is, a remote work brings out an organization's lack of organization. So remote work isn't the problem, but you need to be organized to do it. So if I were running a company today, I'd make it fully remote. I know that I can build that infrastructure into my business. And I think a lot of law firms can be more competitive if they do it for talent. You can really scrape some amazing talent. There are a lot of lawyers who want to work remotely. But just be prepared. You got to do the work. So if you're flying by the seat of your pants to manage teams and just hoping people just get it and figure it out on their own, that's not scalable. You need to really invest that time. And if you can invest it, then it will work both in your office and outside your office.
Now, I'll just yes, and I think it's the mindset that you have to be in the office is one of these limiting beliefs that we need to challenge people to overcome. And you need to be mindful on each kind of function and what each group of people need. For example, if somebody's a senior associate or more experienced, they may be in a place where they could work remotely full-time or part-time. One of the challenges we have to address in our systems and our training that Ben refers to is that so much of knowledge and learning of lawyers is passed along in an in-person tradition. It's learned at lunchtime. It's learned in the hallways. It's informal learning. And we need to, any leadership system needs to have a way to address that need and address the need of the younger workers, not to be at home, but to be part of a work community. So I think it goes back to being mindfully intentional about what are you trying to accomplish, what culture are you trying to build, and how do we create that rather than just having a one size, fits all approach. And you do have to have the technology and the processes. I mean, I remember, Ben, you probably do too. I mean, you were judged. Our partners thought they knew what we were doing because our butt was in the seat or our jacket was on the chair and the light was on. They didn't know what was going on. They just thought that physical presence was some proxy for leadership. And it's not. So I think it's part of what is the strategy for your firm? What is the strategy for the culture you want to create and your systems and productivity? And then how important relatively is in-person physical presence necessary?
Speaking from a fully remote team at Lawyerist and now Affinity, we're partners with them now. So we went from a team of 10 to a team of like 110 overnight, January 1st. and we're all remote. And I also mentioned earlier that we practice what we preach. And so being someone who works for a company that does it very well, and Ben, you nailed it when you said you have to have the structure to support it. Otherwise, like, yes, of course there's going to be concerns. If you think that managing people means always having an eye, like literally an eye on what they are doing and where they are at physically all the time. Ideally, what you want to do is you want to build a team that you can count on because they are bought into the vision that you have for the company, and they are held accountable through systems. And we use, task management, project management, where we track and report our own KPIs so that I own what I'm responsible for. No one's managing me. I don't have anyone looking over my shoulder. And so however the hell I do it and get it done, that's, they don't really care about that. It's just like, this is what we're doing here. Are you on board? And it's people who are bought in. And I think that you have to think about the whole thing as different. You kind of have to reinvent the whole system if it's going to work. And quite frankly, I am a very strong believer that if at all possible to do remote, that it's better for people, or at least to have the option.
I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, it's amazing how many, I wrote this in the chat, but organizations just aren't organized around that. Like, what are the goals? Who's working on what? They're so used to just the oral tradition, as you called it, Doug. That was so well put. I'm gonna add one like little anecdote from a recent interaction I had where partners were saying, well, we used to have these great collaborative conversations at the end of the call. You would come to my room, my office, we'd have a conference call with the client, we'd hang up the phone and we would talk, and that's lost with remote. I'm like, how on earth could we solve this, problem? Because the Zoom hangs up and everyone hangs up. Why don't we schedule a 10-minute debrief automatically, preemptively after every client call and make sure we clear schedules for 10 minutes and we hop on the next Zoom for that? I mean, well, I guess we have to do that. Yes, I guess you have to do that, right? I mean, it's just that little bit of extra intentionality to make that learning happen, like you pointed out, Doug. I mean, this is a huge deal.
Well, yeah, and that ties into, I think, they fall into this mindset. We all fall into mindset of it's hard to manage my schedule because I have to always be available to everybody for everything all the time. So because it's hard, I'm not going to try. I just have to have no structure at all because I've tried to organize my schedule and it blew up on one day. So therefore, I'm not even going to try. But these are the same people that when I'm talking in front of bar associations and I ask who's a control freak in the room, everybody's hand goes up, including mine. But they're not using the simplest tools to manage their own focus and attention. And we call it smart person syndrome. And smart person syndrome is, well, that solution is too simple. So therefore it won't work. I need something more complicated. No, you don't.
I actually want to interject. I'm sorry. I want to hear you guys' response to this. So Sean says, so much learning for new lawyers is in overhearing other attorneys talk about cases in the office. Not sure how you get that if everyone is remote.
I saw that question too. That sparked my interest. I mean, I think that's another example of let's ask the question and really try to be curious about brainstorming some solutions. So first I say, where are those conversations happening? When I was a lawyer, I rarely literally heard people in the office. Usually it was like headphones on, doors closed, working. So where are those conversations happening at your firm? If they're happening, for example, at lunch, if they're happening over happy hours, how do we recreate some of those interactions? So for example, I've seen some success with groups saying, all right, let's have something like our traditional practice group meeting or something. But during the traditional practice group meeting, we're going to have breakout sessions. We're going to randomly assign people. Let's say it's a firm of 30 and all 30 people are on a call. For 10 minutes, we break up into groups of 5 in Zoom. You just breakout groups, very easy. And then you have them in their breakout groups just talk about one interesting thing from one of their cases this week. So it's a little bit more prescriptive, like you're like creating the water cooler moments. It's not happening naturally. So that's true. It doesn't happen naturally as much over Zoom, right? So we're forcing it a little bit, but we can force that a little. We can create that space and environment, given that, and then suddenly those conversations happen. And then it's experiment. You don't like that, people didn't respond, well, let's try something different. But we can think about how do we create those interactions in those small settings, even over this somewhat artificial, like virtual environment.
I mean, you could literally have a water cooler channel in your Teams or your Slack, and you can have a time blocks on everybody's calendars, like what we do. We have Thursday afternoons. There's 1 hour. We call it Taco Thursday, which being from California, that makes no sense to me. I hate it so much. It's Taco Tuesday. But that's besides the point. So we've got this optional Taco Thursday hour for everybody on the team to come and hang out and just talk and BS and have fun. And sometimes we play games and sometimes we talk about work stuff. You don't have to be there if you'd rather just work or be productive or whatever, you can. But it's like, just like, having those water cooler conversations in the office, those aren't mandatory either. But you're right. And also, why can't you build a really successful remote team that's really connected to each other and very supportive of each other, and also do in-person retreats once a quarter and maybe bigger trips away once a year so you can really have that face-to-face time? I think that's really important too.
And yes to all of that. And the thing that, we can learn from other industries. I mean, doctors have found a way to pass along knowledge in a structured way through case reviews. The military does that through after action reviews. So as a leader, your job is to create opportunities to get together on a regular basis. And I see lawyers resist this because there's no time of just let's have a meeting once a week or twice a month of what were some successes you had, what led you to be successful, what were some challenges you had, what was something you wish you knew. So you've at least created an environment where that conversation happens out of the heat of battle when people can use their higher reasoning abilities. And that can be done remotely, but it required the leader's job. It used to be the leader's job was to absorb all that information from their minions and then somehow dispense it out to other people. That doesn't work. I'm not sure it worked then. Now it's about creating a space where people can share and learn and collaborate together. And your job isn't the font of all knowledge, you're the facilitator. And that's a really different role for lawyers who are used to having all the answers.
So I'm sorry to do this, but that is all the time that we have for this discussion. I would like to thank Benjamin Sachs, Doug Brown, and Sara Muender so much for joining me today.